All right, so it's that time of year again. I am working on finishing my show for Studio Gallery. Mostly been working on frames for the last week or so. The show will have between 35 and 40 paintings. A lot of them will be, paintings that I did in the videos here on YouTube. But anyway, that show will open the 6th. I'll put a link to the website down below. But it's really difficult this time of year for me to continue making on-site videos just because I get sort of overwhelmed with, all the show prep. But today I thought what I would do is go through my gear and kind of talk about my current plein air gear and setup, because I have been getting a lot of questions about that. And, often there is sort of evolution in my gear and the colors I use, although not much. But anyway, in lieu of not doing a video at all, I thought it could be cool just to kind of go through my gear. So first we'll start with my backpack. So the backpack I use is an old JanSport that was my daughter's when she was in middle school, but it's actually perfect, pretty big, a lot of pockets, and I've emptied it out. We'll talk about the contents in a moment, but this is one thing I'm leaving in here. This is a square that I made just by gluing 2 pieces of wood together, and this is really useful for horizons because it can be difficult to draw a straight line, especially on a large canvas. I think this is about 16 inches long. Also a bungee cord that I use with my easel to hold the panel to the easel. And there's a few other things in here that probably I don't even need to have in here. Like this is liquin impasto, which is a thicker form of liquin. I don't ever use this, so I probably should take that out. And then this is Gamblin solvent-free gel. I don't really use this either. As you guys know, I use Liquin Original mostly. Then there's a bit of PVC piping here. I put like a cap on the end. And this is to hold a sort of large-ish brush. What is this? This is a number 10 natural bristle flat. I've also got another bit of PVC here with an assortment of natural bristle and synthetics. Mostly what I use are flats, almost exclusively. So, most of the time natural bristle flats, and I'm using Utrecht 209s, but any natural bristle will work. I've used rosemary as well. I've also been liking this synthetic flat. It's kind of soft, and it allows for more precise strokes. And this one, I don't even know who makes this. I think this might be a rosemary brush, actually, because Araya gave me this one. And I know he uses rosemary brushes. This is an old Gatorade container that I keep filled with odorless mineral spirits. And then this is an old vitamin bottle that's filled with Liquin Original. I have a large container that I keep, I buy it in large quantities and then just pour it off into this container. And then, a brush washer here. I don't even know what brand, really old, as you can see, just covered with dried paint. Paper towels, of course. Then I have like a plastic Ziploc bag here for, used paper towels. Here is a medium cup. And this is what I put my liquid in. Here's a bag of extra gloves. A lot of people ask why I wear gloves. It's just because I'm I'm a messy painter. I always have an extra tube of white paint, and I use Winton brand white paint mostly. I also use Winton's ultramarine, and these are really inexpensive, but the quality is actually quite good. I like to use materials that are high quality but that aren't super expensive, so I'm not afraid to squeeze out a lot of paint and use a lot of paint or to experiment. This is a brush holder that I made probably 20 years ago when I first started painting, just out of some scrap canvas. As you've probably seen, I clip it to the side of my palette using a binder clip. What else do I have here? I have view finders, or for composition. So these are just view finders that I made out of cardboard in various different aspect ratios. I think this is like an 11 by 14 or 8 by 10, 16 by 20. So it's a 4 by 5 ratio, more of a panorama. This is like a 1 by 2 ratio, a square, and then also like a 3 by 4 ratio, like say an 18 by 24, that sort of thing. I don't actually use these very much anymore. Part of the reason is that I'm constantly moving things around. So, a long time ago, I'd look through these and I'd compose, and I'd just like draw exactly what I saw through the viewfinder. but I don't do that anymore so much, as you guys have seen if you watch my videos. Now I mostly use the view catcher, which is like got an adjustable opening here, so it's pretty flexible as far as, you know, different aspect ratios. And so I use this mostly just to get a basic compositional idea, but then I, you know, move things around. So it's just to get that initial idea. This is a color isolator that I made when I first started painting. And I had various different values, you know, grayscale values painted. I think this is like a mid-tone gray. And then, you know, this used to be black. And so the idea is that you could, you know, hold it up and isolate the color, you know, and then also kind of judge the value. That never really worked very well for me. Because as you can see, if you tilt this thing, I mean, the values constantly change. I don't know. I used it a little bit in the beginning just for color isolation, not so much anymore. Now I find what I do a lot, if I want to isolate colors, I'll just make like a little opening with my finger, something like that, and that'll kind of isolate the color so I can judge it a little more accurately. All right, so we'll move on to the palette here, and this is my folding box palette. I love this thing. This is a 12 by 16. I made it myself. If you're interested in this kind of palette box, there's a guy named James Coulter who makes these, artboxandpanel.com. As for colors, I use a warm and cool of each of the primaries and then a few earth tones. So titanium white, and then cadmium yellow medium, yellow ochre. This is burnt sienna and alizarin crimson. I do have a purple that I use quite a bit. This is kind of, you know, this is secondary color, but I use dioxazine purple, ultramarine blue, and phthalo blue. There are a few other guest colors on here that I use occasionally, like cobalt teal or cadmium red light, and also cad yellow lemon. As for paint brands, I mostly use Winsor & Newton, Utrecht, and what else? And Gamblin. I think there's some Gamblin in here as well. It's actually stuck to the bottom, of course. But there it is, in Gamblin. I keep them in this wooden box just because it's in the back of my car, and you know, I have a bunch of stuff bouncing around, so keeping it in this wooden box, you know, keeps keeps my other stuff paint free, more or less. Some people have asked like how I came up with the colors on my palette. When I first started, I just read books about painting, and there were certain colors that just showed up over and over again. Like cadmium yellows showed up, usually cadmium yellow light or cadmium yellow medium. And so I figured, all right, that's a good color to have, you know, to start off with, because it just was used so commonly. Another one was burnt sienna. And I've mentioned before, like I started out just by using this color to tone my panels and also to sketch, just because I like to have that kind of orange color popping through. But I found that it actually is a really useful color, you know, mixed with, say, ultramarine blue. It makes for a nice black or really dark blue or almost dark purplish, dull purple. And so I use that mixture a lot for my, you know, for my darkest mixtures. Ultramarine was another color that is on almost every palette. So that was kind of a no-brainer as well. Yellow ochre, you know, a lot of books I read said, you know, not to use yellow ochre or not to use earth tones, you know, mix your own earth tones, but I don't follow along with that, honestly, because that's a really useful color. I don't need much of this, but this paint, like, over time, it gets really stiff for some reason. Cadmium red light. I use this typically to mix with, you know, cadmium yellow if I want a really strong orange color, especially like in the cliffs here in California. There's a lot of, you know, a lot of orange cliffs, and just even if I'm having little bits of saturated orange in there, it's really helpful. I used, you know, there was a time where I had cadmium orange on my palette, and I just didn't like that color. It didn't mix with other colors as well. Kind of looked artificial. I think the orange that I get by mixing these two is kind of a nice, yeah, it's a nice orange. I don't know what that means, a nice orange. It just looks good to me and mixes well with other colors. Alizarin crimson, kind of a controversial color, but on so many palettes. Again, it was mentioned in the books that I read. And the reason it's controversial is it says here like light fastness. I can't even see anymore because there's so much paint on here, but you know, it's not considered to be fully light fast. But I did a lot of reading on it, and basically it's especially not light fast if you're using alizarin crimson watercolor, or if you're painting with oils and you're using it as a glaze. So you're using bits of this mixed in with, say, some sort of medium. It can also fade. But if you're using it in mixes, apparently it's fine. And so I don't worry about it. It's such a beautiful color, such a useful color, that it will always be on my palette. And there are permanent versions, but they're just not, they're not the same color. They're completely different. They're like a quinacridone based color. So not a fan of that. They just super punchy, and I don't know, it's something really awesome about genuine alizarin. So, and like I said, there's a lot of people I've talked to, you know, other painters who paint professionally, that have that on their palette as well for the same reason. This is Phthalo Blue, green shade from Utrecht. Super strong tinting power, which is nice for, like, say if I want to have a light value saturated blue, like kind of a cerulean blue. Really useful color. You know, you can tint white with that, and even, like I said, keep the value light but still get nice saturation. And then of course mixed with, like, say a yellow, like you know, cadmium yellow lemon, you can get these beautiful aqua colors. You know, I can mix a color kind of like that, which is, you know, cobalt teal. But like I said, sometimes I'll squeeze out cobalt teal as just like a convenience color. But I can mix that using, you know, phthalo blue and say cadmium yellow lemon. And then the only secondary color that's always on my palette would be dioxazine purple. And sometimes I find it's nice to have a really strong, you know, saturated purple, for the same reason, like I can tint and get a really light value but saturated purple using this. It's not as strong tinting as phthalo, but it's close. It's very strong. It's also handy to have on the palette to use to desaturate a yellow mixture, because I gray down my mixtures using complements. So obviously the complement of yellow is purple. So just having that, you know, handy to be able to desaturate a yellow is really, it's really nice and convenient. I'll squeeze out even my guest colors today. So I'm going to squeeze out some cobalt teal as well. This is another paint that gets really, it's just really stiff paint. I mean, look at that. It's hard to get it out of there. And also squeeze out some of this cadmium yellow lemon pure. And with my cadmium colors, you know, I go with the pure colors. They're more expensive. I don't use, you know, like say cadmium yellow lemon hue. And the hue colors are just they're inexpensive approximations of the true cadmium colors. With some of the other hues, like say a cerulean hue, you know, that can actually work, because a cerulean hue, which I don't have on the palette here, is basically just a mixture of titanium or zinc white and a phthalo blue. So that's fine. Titanium white, as I mentioned, I use Winton, which is considered like a student grade paint, but honestly the quality of this stuff is really nice. I'm just going to squeeze out a little bit for now, but yeah, it's really nice, nice quality. And I think in the US here, last time I checked, if you get it on sale, it's about $10 or $11 a tube for a big tube. Let's see how many milliliters are in there. 200 milliliters. So it's a big tube of paint. And other items here are panels. This one here is a 16 by 24, and this is a panel I've made out of masonite. I think it's like 3/16 inch masonite or hardboard. I sand it down and put 3 coats of gesso on there, and I use Utrecht professional grade gesso, and I put some pumice into the mix, so it's got a little bit of tooth and absorbency. And I'll put a link down below to a video talking about how I go about making my panels. I also have a wet panel carrier. This one here happens to be 16 by 20 inches in dimensions, and got a 16 by 20 in here right now, but I could put a 12 by 16 in here or a 16 by 16. Anything that's 16 inches in one dimension, it can, you know, fit in, and they've obviously got a cutout. This is made by Raymar. These are really nice, pretty expensive, but definitely very handy. Unfortunately, lately I've been painting on 16 by 24s, and you know, they'll fit in here but stick out of the top, which is better than nothing. But ideally, I'd like to make, you know, a wet panel carrier for this size panel. Also here I've got like a 15 by 30. I don't have a panel carrier for this. So with these, I just kind of carry them, and I've got surfboards in here always. So I just set them on the surfboard for the ride home. Usually set them on a towel so they don't slide around, and there's always extra towels in here. And then I've got my Anderson easel, which, you know, we'll go and set this up and you can see it. I mean, you've seen it in my videos. But anyway, this is from takeiteasel.com. I believe they're handmade in Vermont. And when I bought this, it was about $400, but really nice quality. All right, so I've got all my gear with me, and I can walk about, I'd say like 1.5 miles or 2 miles with this setup. I put a couple of like blocks onto my shoulder straps, and I screwed them in using panhead screws from down below. And these allow me to hang things onto my shoulder without them slipping off. So I got my wet panel carrier, and then my pallet in a canvas bag here. And then on this side, I've got my easel. Like I said, I can walk long distances really comfortably. So I left a lot of that in real time so you could kind of see how long it actually takes me to set up this easel. It's about 5 minutes, very easy to set up. One thing I did before I started taking this easel into the field was I kind of practiced on my driveway, just setting it up, breaking down a couple times just to get the hang of it. And because prior to this one, I was using a French box easel. And so I was kind of intimidated to use this easel actually. But now I love it, and it's pretty much the only easel I use. One drawback is you can't paint small panels on it really. Like even 11 by 14 is kind of a stretch. Smallest I paint these days is a 12 by 16, so that's fine. But let's take a closer look. The easel came with a kind of top attachment, which I don't ever use. It's a little bit clumsy for my liking. So I just hold the top with a bungee that I kind of pull down, and I attach it down here. Also, the easel came with some pegs to support, you know, a canvas or a panel, and they're just really big and thick. And I found that they got in the way, so I made my own, you know, I made my own pegs that kind of have like just like a screw and a washer that I attach to a dowel, so it doesn't really obstruct much of the canvas, so I can really swing the brush. I just rest my palette on the easel. Sometimes I'll like bungee it or strap it, but I don't really think it's necessary. There it is. That's the setup. So that pretty much covers my current setup. I am going to do a painting, but that will be next week's video. Also, I'm going to try to do a Q&A so that I don't miss posting. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll do a Q&A. I haven't done one of those in a long time. And then, like I said, also if you're interested in getting details about the show, it's October 6th at Studio Gallery in San Francisco, and I'll put a link down below. If you follow them, you can even sign up to have notifications in case you want to know as soon as the show is online, but I'll be announcing it here on YouTube as well. And as usual, if you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. So check it out. Other than that, stay creative, and I will see you next week.